I've mentioned several times now that we, of course, all descend from Homo erectus. This is a hominid that occurs in Africa at least 1.8 million years ago, and certainly earlier than that, I think, because we have something like this at even that early date, 1.8 million, as far east as East Asia, probably at Wushan Cave, although the dates for that site might be questionable. But still, we know that we have the Dmanisi hominid, which looks very much like Homo erectus, or something even earlier, Dmanisi hominid in Eastern Europe, something on the order of 1.8 to 1.74 million years ago. So, whatever the case, we have Homo erectus evolving first in Africa and emerging out of Africa quite early on, somewhere closer to 2 million years ago than 1 million years ago. We used to think it was about 1 million years ago that Homo erectus leaves Africa. That's simply wrong. We've got them much earlier now in a number of places. Now, Homo erectus, you remember, emerges out of Africa, remains in the Old World. We're not concerned with the New World yet, or in this class at all. New World is not colonized by hominids until about 20,000 years ago, very late in our case. But Homo erectus is characterized by this migration out of Africa. And by 1 million years ago, you would have had sub-Himalayan Asia and Africa populated by Homo erectus. That is, this hominid with a cranial capacity, you can see, similar to the cranial capacity of modern humans, but considerably smaller. The cranial capacity of modern humans averages something on the order of 1450 cc's, cubic centimeters, 1450. The average cranial capacity of Neanderthal closer to 900 or 1,000 cc's. So 400 cc's less, a couple of Coke cans, essentially soda cans less brain tissue than we see in modern humans. Homo erectus is characterized by this larger brain than we see in the other primates and other mammals. That is, encephalization, the larger or enlargement of the brain over evolutionary time. The brain, in fact, is outside of the size you would expect for a body of this size. That is, there's this thing called allometry, this phenomenon, a biological phenomenon called allometry. If the body gets larger, the brain, to a degree, also gets a little bit larger. But the brain of a hominid, and in particular Homo erectus, the brain is much larger than you would expect of a mammal of that given body size. That's encephalization. That is one of the primary characteristics of the lineage Homo and Homo erectus in particular. They differ, though. They have a relatively large brain, but again, look at how small it is as a biological investment in terms of the species. A biological investment rather smaller and less significant to survival than you see in modern humans here. The brain case here is a little bit wider at the bottom and comes up towards sort of a point. There's very little of a forehead. You see the frontal lobe in this modern human has expanded, giving us essentially a forehead, whereas that's essentially missing in Homo erectus. The face of Homo erectus, again compared to modern humans, we'll come to Neanderthal in a little bit. The face of Homo erectus, very heavily built, massive brow ridges, pretty massive facial architecture. A lot of this has to do with the distribution of chewing stresses through the face. That is, as the hominid bit down on things, the stresses were absorbed by the bones of the face. Now, while that is a characteristic of this hominid, to tell you the truth, when you look at the facial architecture and also the teeth, what you see is that, yes, they're relatively heavily built compared to modern humans, but compared to other primates and compared to other hominids, the Australopithecines, for example, what you see is that the teeth in particular are quite a bit smaller and the face is not as heavily constructed. What does that mean? Well, it has to do with that phenomenon I mentioned quite a while back called the decoupling of behavior from anatomy. You remember that behavior can be decoupled from anatomy by hominids through tool use and complex culture, instructions for how to behave, rather than simply surviving by what they biologically, their biological constitution, their anatomical construction. Well, this then is the anatomy of hominids that have decoupled behavior from anatomy. By the time, or to a great degree, by the time of Homo erectus, they do not need anymore, in a biological sense, in an evolutionary sense, they no longer require these massively constructed faces and massively constructed teeth to survive. They're pre-processing their food, for example, with stone tools, such that there's no selective advantage to massive, heavy teeth. Let me show you an animal that is a hominid that has not decoupled behavior from anatomy in a significant way. The robust Australopithecine, just to give you a comparison. Again, modern human, Homo erectus. Robust Australopithecine. Hominid, walked upright, looked very much like a sort of gorilla, but walking upright, but look at the size of the teeth. Compare the size of the teeth of the robust Australopithecine with Homo erectus. This animal has decoupled behavior from anatomy. It can get away with smaller teeth, and it does in an evolutionary sense. This one is using its body, its massive teeth, and its massive facial architecture to process the foods that it was eating, and its chewing stresses are reflected in this massively constructed face. In Homo erectus, you see the beginning of a trend, less focus on the biological characteristics to stay alive and more focus on the cultural and technological characteristics or properties or abilities of that hominid. By the time we get to modern humans, the face is much more gracial, lightly built, very small, sort of tucked underneath almost the brain case, massive brain case. Essentially what we've got is barely there, teeth, tiny little teeth, a tiny little face, and a gigantic bulbous brain case. And the way that this animal survives is not because of the heavily construction here and its ability to chomp through all kinds of difficult foods. The ability to survive here is contained in the brain as a set of memories, a set of ideas, a culture essentially for constructing tools and techniques in order to survive. The decoupling of behavior from anatomy as seen here in the anatomy of modern humans.